Well, good evening, everyone. It is just 7 o'clock, pretty much on the dot. I'd like to go ahead and get started. And welcome. Thank you for coming out to the last speaker in our series for the fall. We are so grateful to partner with the Bethlehem Public Library. Of course, we're the Bethlehem Historical Association, and we're very pleased to partner with them through this process of presenting speakers. I did promise the trustees of the library about 30 seconds to give a plug for their upcoming votes. So I want, if you would welcome Gail.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. I'm Gail Sacco. I'm one of the trustees that you elected. I just wanted to let you know that we do have a vote coming up on our building project on December 12th. We also, for people who are not going to be around, you can get an absentee ballot or a ballot by mail simply by calling the school district office. We want to encourage everybody to vote. The new building is going to help in terms of this kind of space. It's going to increase the children's room with a bathroom next to it. It's also going to add study rooms, and it's also going to address things like asbestos and roof and boiler. So I have these. I'll leave them on the front table. There's a QR code, and we're happy to answer questions if you email or call us. But please come out and vote, and let your friends, if you know they're going away, let them know that there are absentee ballots and mail-in ballots, because we do want everybody to vote. And have fun at your talk. Enjoy it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Susan.
You're welcome. I'll take this. Thank you, Gail. So I mentioned we're finishing up our fall series. I'm going to give you a little teaser for what's coming in the spring. In February, we're going to have a talk about Victory Gardens. In March, it will be Adventures in New York History with Bruce Deerstein. And then in April will be a short history of the bicycle. So look for Bethlehem Historical's website, our emails, and also, of course, the library newsletter and publicity. So that's coming up in the spring. Before we get to the spring, though, we have some very special events in December for the historical. And these are our holiday open houses. I don't know I have a little cheat sheet here. I hope all of you take one on your way home. The museum is going to be decorated so beautifully for the Christmas this year. I was down there last week, and we hauled out the big tree. So we're going for big decorations this year. It's going to be a lot of fun, and it's just kind of neat to see the museum all decked out for the holidays. The dates are Sunday afternoons, December 8th and 15th, from 1 to 4. And the Cedar Hill Schoolhouse Museum, it's at 1003 River Road in Selkirk. It's about 10 minutes from here across town. So please do come out. It's free. It's open to the public. All are welcome to stop by, enjoy the exhibits, the decorations, and of course some refreshments, cookies and punch will be available. So I hope you all can come out for that. And that's our holiday open houses. For just the museum. So the question was, what are our hours for the museum? Right now, you got to come for the holiday open houses to see the museum. We will be closed after December 15th, and we're installing some new exhibits, and we'll be open again the beginning of February. And we're generally Sunday afternoons from 2 to 4, but not starting again till February. All right, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening, Jonathan Palmer. Jonathan's going to share with us the surprisingly riveting history of the humble hay press. It should be a good one. Jonathan has served as the Greene County historian since 2020 and is currently employed as the archivist for the County of Ulster. Originally from Athens, New York, he holds a MSIS from the University at Albany and is a 2014 graduate of Siena College. So everyone, please welcome Jonathan and his talk on the hay press.
All right, are we, hey, perfect, it works. The microphone sounds all right, everybody? You can hear me okay? Yeah. This is all an experiment tonight. So first off, I want to thank everybody for coming out this evening. I know it's tough to get up off the couch as soon as it gets dark out for the year, but it's great to see everybody, and great proof of concept that I don't catch on fire when I cross the county line now, ever since I've become Greene County historian. So I don't know if I'm catching a little feedback or not, but if we have to, I'll switch over to the other mic, because I am hearing something. There's a little chime there. Yeah. Is it where I'm standing? If I'm standing here, is that all right? Perfect. Okay, so I can't start jumping around and gesturing wildly, which is a bummer. Yeah, right off the bat, I just want to thank, first off, imagine there is a large curtain over this. I want to thank Dennis, who brought this in his car. I've never given one of these talks where I actually had a model of a hay press that I could demonstrate their operation with. We don't have any hay to go with it, but when we get around to it, this will give you a good sense of what the actual function is and how these things are operating, and just how astoundingly cool the innovators are who are cooking these ideas up to get these things to work back during the 1830s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, which is kind of the window that I'm going to be really focusing on. So, the hay press. Here's my little rubric for tonight. If I miss any of these topics, you can scold me afterwards. Commit this to memory, check them off as we're going through them, but I want to cover the agrarian Hudson Valley. We're going to talk about changes in the valley from 1790 to 1830. The mechanical press as an agricultural tool, the hay press, what it is and how it works, regional hay press designs, and the Vanderzee family hay press. I don't know if Lynn is here tonight, but the Greene County Historical Society for the last decade has been in possession of a very interesting mid-19th century hay press that was originally in the Vanderzee family barn, which is a farm that's right on the county line between Queens and New Baltimore. So we get to bridge the gap talking about this topic today between counties. So, any questions before we get rolling here? Everybody can still hear me okay? Great. All right. So, I don't even know where to begin here, but the point I want to get across, the thing I want everybody to have and hold in their heads as we get wading into what the hay press is that the period immediately following the close of the American Revolution is a period of immense change, rapid advancement, transformations in labor systems and labor structure, and transformations in technology. There's so much going on here in the Hudson Valley. You have to remember that this is the place where humanity first travels faster than the wind could blow them or a horse could carry them. This is one of the places where the innovators who make instantaneous communication possible, innovate and create these ideas for us. This is a really, really important region broadly to the national consciousness, but also to the people who are living here immediately and have the day-to-day experience of these innovations improving their daily lives. So I've got two images up here. The top one is one that I don't know if we're all familiar with, but you should be. This is the Van Bergen overmantel. It's the earliest landscape painting of the Catskill Mountains. Has a special place in my heart for that reason. It's painted circa 1735. It's now in the collections of the Fenimore Art Museum out in Cooperstown. And it shows the Van Bergen family farm at Leeds, New York around 1735. And it is amazing because they really do show everything. This painting shows, and if you can understand where my pointer is at, if you follow my shadow, I'm directly below some hay barracks and a New World Dutch barn here. I am also standing underneath farm laborers. We have Native Americans and enslaved people in this scene, showing the tapestry of people and the types of labor systems that are being practiced on this farm. And then we have the Van Bergen homestead itself. We have pictures of what their livestock looks like, their farm vehicles, and a little bit of social commentary. One of the Van Bergens is being bucked off a horse in this picture as well. It's kind of funny. But this gives us a picture, first off, of what the agrarian landscape looks at that time here in the Hudson Valley. These are farms that are producing grains that are being exported to the West Indies as part of a system that supports the operation of for-profit plantations that are run primarily and exclusively by enslaved labor and are not self-sustaining in and of themselves. So when we think of the Hudson Valley at that time, do not think of it as a backwater. Don't think of it as a place that's tucked away and the people are hewing log cabins out of the woods and then growing their corn so they don't starve in the winter. These are large operations. We can think of these in a sense as plantations, and they use that word in the time to describe farms like this. The Van Vechten family was a farm just like this about 5 miles away from Van Bergen's. Describe it as a farm and plantation situated on the west side of Hudson's River. So let's picture that. And, so we're using enslaved labor at this time to drive this for-profit agricultural venture. We're also using labor systems that include indentured servants. We have leasehold systems where farmers are leasing out land that are held by large landowners. That, of course, all culminates in the anti-rent wars of the 1840s. It's a really, really interesting place. And, of course, being that we're using primarily enslaved labor, that means that because we're getting this labor for free, we aren't necessarily going to be considering the ways to make that free manpower more economically, efficient. We're not going to think about innovations that make somebody's time, multiply threefold or fourfold so that we're deriving more wealth from the time we're expending. But that all begins to change, of course, during the Twilight period. And when I talk about the Twilight period, I'm talking about the period 1799 to 1827, when New York decides to take the slow Band-Aid approach to ending slavery in the state. And we figure out all of these very painful, confusing ways to try to ease our economy and our culture and our society out of slavery as an economic system and as a social system. We got a hand raised in the back.
Yeah, where are Native Americans falling in all of this?
Oh, that is such a great question. Yeah, where do Native Americans fall in all of that? Because it's cool. It's neat that we see them. These are probably members of what are referred to as the Catskill Indians in historic records of that time. They're probably a Munsee-speaking branch of what becomes now the Stockbridge-Munsee Nation that's on a reservation in Wisconsin. And they're on a reservation in Wisconsin along with their fellow descendants in Ontario and in Oklahoma, because this moment represents a time when there's this kind of strange coexistence that occurs where people are being expelled piecemeal from their ancestral homelands, but also right before the Revolution, where alliances that fall on the side of the revolutionary colonies and on the side of Great Britain divide Native peoples between these two factions and end up precipitating their forced expulsion by the military during the war. So the period we're really talking about when we get into the hay press and its use as a tool in agriculture, we're talking about a period after the people who had resided here for 8,000 to 9,000 years have been forced out and forced west. They're out on the Grand River. They're mingling with the Haudenosaunee at that point. It's not my forte, that particular topic, because I've got a lot of friends who are really, really deep into this research now, because a lot of this is stuff that we're just beginning to recover now because of translations of documents and things like that. But we're already 15 minutes in and I'm into the weeds here too. So I just want to have this in mind that we're talking about these labor systems that are changing. At the same time, here in the Hudson Valley, this other weird thing happens. In merry old New England, you have all these 5th and 6th sons of these old New England families who, their dad's writing out his will and saying, son, this 200-acre farm, there's no way to divide it between the 7 of you boys. You better go west and seek lands of opportunity. And so these New Englanders, they go west and they wander over to the east bank of the Hudson and they look across at all these funny little Dutchmen and their funny little Dutch farms over there, and they say, there's the west, there's the land of opportunity, there's the Catskills, that's the frontier. And they show up in the 1780s and 90s and create this cultural collision. And they speak different languages, they have different churches, they have different customs, and there's all of this angst that's, roiled up because of that. And, when we think of reading like Washington Irving's The Legend of Rip Van Winkle and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, those, of course, are kind of a diptych that gives both sides of this strange cultural collision that occurs between these culturally Dutch people who had been residing in the Hudson Valley for 150 years and these New Englanders who are showing up with all their tricky ideas of innovations and their Presbyterian churches. It really is. There's this this change that's all occurring at this time. And so the second picture I have, kind of the culmination of all of that, and I love this because what we've got is a scene of a landing on the Hudson River. This is from the Albany Institute. It's painted by A.D.O. Brower of Catskill, who is most famous for his paintings that he does of the gold rush out west. And he's captured a moment here. This is in like 1835, we'll say. This shows the economic landscape on the great thoroughfare that's driving all economic advancement in the state of New York at that time. Here's the Hudson River, and here is where the rubber meets the road. These are the landings that are constructed by these New Englanders. They buy up these riverfront landings, they lease them out, they construct warehouses, they become the middlemen and the freight brokers, they bring the capital that allows them to construct new shipyards, build new sloops on this kind of interesting vernacular design local to the valley at that time. And they transform the entire economic landscape here. They make this a place where farmers are going to go to bring their produce down from the backcountry to the river and get it shipped to major metropolitan centers that are growing exponentially decade by decade. So we'll think of like the city of New York, the city of Boston. These are the ones that I'm going to be focusing on. We all clear on all that so far? Boy, that was the first slide. No. All right. Just to give you all, again, a sense of this. This is a map showing the relative situation of a tract of land belonging to J.B. Church, Esquire. This is printed in 1804. And this shows the state of New York, as well as New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, a little bit of Maryland, some of Delaware. And what it's trying to illustrate is to contextualize a tract of land in western New York, which is this little gray box up there that you can see. And they're trying to show you, yeah, if you're one of these people living in these other states, look at where this is. Look at all these new roads that are being constructed. Look at this proposed, you know, they're thinking about creating a new state road that cuts through the Catskills to get out to the bounty lands given to Revolutionary War veterans in western New York. This is a place of change. This is a place of advancement. And I love this because they illustrate the principal cities along the Hudson at that time. We have New York, which is really kind of inconspicuous down here. It's almost like they want to skip it. But then we've got Newburgh with a turnpike. We have Poughkeepsie with a turnpike. And then up above that, before Albany, the only other point that they show is the cities of Hudson and the village of Catskill, with the Susquehanna running west out over the mountains into the Susquehanna Valley. These are the thoroughfares that are bringing all of these people through and bringing them out west into these lands that are going to be developed and turned into the new breadbasket of the young republic.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Susquehanna Valley to west or east?
I don't know, actually. So when we're looking at this, I'm thinking of like Unadilla. So let's see, we've got, here's the Susquehanna River, and it forks. So really what I'm talking about, when I talk about the Susquehanna Valley, what we're looking at here is like the region of the Finger Lakes, you know, the heart of the bounty lands that are granted. And J.B. Church is somebody you guys should know because he's married to this young woman whose brother-in-law is this other young guy named Alexander Hamilton. These are all very well-connected families. So all this change. No PowerPoint presentation would be complete without boring graphs. So we've got, first off, this is the population growth of the city of New York. And this is important because what this is, this graph just charts demand, increased demand. It shows growth in population, but it shows increased demand for pretty much everything, including horses. And horses need hay. Or so I've been told. Horses need about 15 to 20 pounds of hay a day, depending on the amount of labor they're performing. By the 1860s and 70s, by most accounts that I could find, there's about 150 to 200,000 horses living within the bounds of the city of New York. And that's not counting the immediate vicinity around it. Everybody's first thought should be that's a lot of poop. Everybody's second thought should be that's a lot of hay. And the reason we're talking about horses is because they are the prime movers. So I've got two pictures here. You know, I've got John Ferguson Weir's The Gun Foundry, which is a picture of one of the foundries at Cold Springs. This painting shows the foundry in operation in 1866. So this is like the Civil War. This is northern industry. But this kind of illustrates the innovation that had been going on here in the valley, really from the 1830s and 40s, that culminates in this unbelievable industrial powerhouse that absolutely allows the North to just squash the southern states during the Civil War. I know we can wade into the weeds about talking about the Civil War, but in New York State there are more foundries capable of casting heavy guns than in the entire Confederacy prior to the Civil War. I think there's like 3 in New York State alone that are capable of casting a Dahlgren cannon, and there's none in the South, actually. There was a problem with federal contracts. So think about that, the scale of industry just in one state in the North. And of course, the tapestry that kind of illustrates all of the back of this is the invention of the steamboat. So in 1807, we know that Robert Fulton wakes up one day and says, you know, what if we lit one of these boats on fire to make it go faster? And Robert Livingston says, yeah, sure, that's a great idea, let's try it. And they invent the steamboat, or cop a, design from somebody else and create the steamboat. But the steamboat becomes the prime mover that connects the upper valley to the city of New York in a timely way. And timely is important when you're dealing with perishables. Hay is a perishable. So we've got the city of New York with its prime mover needing a lot of hay. We've got ways to move that hay. We've got these New Englanders who are busy innovating and infusing capital into these old agrarian communities here in the valley, and they're developing landings and things like that. And in the middle of all of this, all these farmers get this crazy idea. What if we made our hay bales bigger? This is really, it's as simple as it gets. So, the creation and application of the mechanical press. Because I have very few hobbies, I spent a lot of time back when, in 2018 and 19, the Greene County Historical Society reconstructed a hay barn on their campus, a mid-19th century hay barn, to house a hay press they were given from the Vanderzee farm. I wanted to know who the heck designed that hay press. So in my searching, I found every patent I could possibly find from the U.S. Patent Office between 1836 and 1880 showing designs of hay presses of the mid-19th century and how they innovate and change. And so I've got hundreds and hundreds of patents for hay presses that I've found state by state, region by region, and really that is the basis for what we're going to be talking about from this point on. The problem is, and the reason I picked from 1836 onwards, is because the U.S. Patent Office burns in 1836, and all of the groovy drawings and illustrations and patents are lost from prior to that. Fortunately, there are abstracts that the Patent Office published for those who wanted to know and read up on the latest inventions in the Young Republic. They would publish these abstracts year by year. So I have a rough idea. When we're talking about hay presses prior to the Patent Office fire in 1830, primarily what we're talking about is something called a screw press. There are early lever presses that are using different forms of levers and configurations to multiply force to compact things, but the mechanical press, really, the entire principle behind it is to either apply pressure to extract from something or to apply pressure to compress something to package it in a more compact and marketable size so you can ship more in a smaller space on board things like sloops and steamboats. We got a hand raised.
Yeah, are they pressing the hay or making it larger?
They're compressing the hay. Yeah.
You're getting more hay for a given
Yes.
area.
Yeah, but if you're making a cider press, you want to squish those apples to get, the apple juice out. So like we're talking about presses that are going to do a lot of different things, but really I kind of narrowed my scope to, and this is really handy, the two major types of presses that are being patented in the United States to compress things into bales are cotton presses, obviously, and hay presses. perhaps also, obviously. So, those are the varieties and types of presses. How does a hay press work? There are a lot of ways to make a hay press work. There's lots and lots of patents that tell you they can work this way or that way, or we use a screw, or we use a lever, or we use a steam piston. Sometimes we'll hook up a long camshaft to wheels on a vehicle, and so when that vehicle's being pulled, it articulates a pressure plate inside a box to make something, compress something while it's moving. You know, we come up with all these crazy ideas for how to do this. And I'll wade into that. But the long and short of it is that really from the 1790s through the 1830s, you know, we don't have a very clear picture, but we do have an idea that people are starting to think about what the hay press is and how to make it better. It's really after 1836 that you start to see this kind of exponential growth of patents. Starting in 1836, 37, you see a couple. By the 1850s and 60s, it seems like everybody and their brother has decided they wanted to innovate on this thing that they had worked around when they were kids. And I'll get into a little bit more of that. Yeah, another question.
Before they were pressing the hay, how were they transporting it?
They're really not transporting it in any like meaningful way. They're creating bushels, they're making sheaves of wheat, they're making smaller bales that you can move by hand, but they're primarily storing these things where the hay is grown. So you have to think, like the city of New York, Brooklyn is a farm until the 1830s. You know, it's apple orchards. The Messerol family, I'm trying to think which Messerol it is. I think it's Peter Messerol is born on his family's apple orchard in Brooklyn and dies in the middle of a city block in the same house he was born in the 1880s. Like, this is the change that's happening too. So you're growing the hay, because hay is combustible. If you don't store hay right, it catches on fire by itself. If you store it too long, it's no good anymore. You can't really ship things economically by sloop, because if you end up with a bale of hay that you put on board a boat, all the stuff down in the bilge is going to be rotten and moldy by the time it gets there, and all the stuff on top might have aged beyond its useful point. You know, you're talking about a week on board a hot boat in the summertime, and then it has to be moved from there, assuming you could get it into a shape that's easy to handle. So really, this is why we're talking about the balers, because all of this increased demand in the 1840s, 50s, 60s in the city of New York is driving new innovations to create these marketable big bales of well-seasoned fresh hay that can be moved rapidly. So like the Van Bergen overmantel I showed you, there were two structures that are important to see there. The New World Dutch barn, which is kind of a dual structure that's great for livestock, it's great to keep grains in, and it's got lofts to keep hay well ventilated. You also had what's called a hay barrack, where you have these kind of outdoor structures with a modular moving roof to keep the rain off of a stack of hay while it's seasoning in the field. So it's a very, very manual process. It's a very labor-intensive process, and you know, we're talking about this transition to saying, okay, we can perform X, Y, and Z. Now we need it to get it from point A to point B. Is that clear? Okay, all right. Good questions, though. So that's kind of the pressures driving innovation. So we'll move on here. So this is, actually, this is pressed by a guy named D.H. Hill. This is a patent from Alabama in 1869, and not to poo-poo Alabama, but they had the very creative idea of saying, okay, let's take a screw press that's basically been in use since Roman times, and let's add 3 chambers instead of just 1, so we can make 3 bales. And this is kind of the bottom of the barrel of innovation in press design, but it shows you very clearly what these earliest presses that are being made in the United States would look like and how they operate in principle. You've got these arms on the top that you can either hook up animals or have people push, and they're going to turn it like a corkscrew. And as you turn down, the pressure is applied, and it gets as compressed as you can compress it. You then band it, and then you back the screw off, and then you take the bales out and you put them somewhere. So, as simple as it gets. These designs, and yeah, question.
If it's combustible, doesn't compressing it make it more dangerous?
It can. If you press too much hay into a bale and the moisture content isn't right, a hay bale is going to get hot, and a hay bale can get hot enough to combust. So, you know, I think this is one of the things, as you're compressing these, what they're trying to figure out, and I think this is where cotton presses and hay presses diverge in design, is the orders of magnitude of force that they're trying to apply to these bales. Because what you're trying to make in a press like this or like these is something along the lines of like a 200-pound block. And that 200-pound block is going to contain X amount of hay that you could load into the compression chamber. And you know, we're also assuming that the guys who are doing this are guys with the know-how to know when the hay is seasoned just right, when the moisture content is right, and how much hay you want to compress into that thing to make sure that it's not going to just burn all of a sudden on a steamboat somewhere. So, but yeah, that is a great question. Yeah, we've got a couple hands raised.
When you compress hay, does it extend its usability at all, as opposed to having it loose?
You know, yeah, it does. The interior, it does keep the interior hay from seasoning as quickly, but you're still limited with your lifespan for it, because down in the core of that hay bale, you're going to start to get mold. Pretty much no matter what. There's almost no way to avoid it. You know, and you need just, anybody who's done hay knows you got to have the right chain of sequences of events in the season to season that hay correctly out in the field, bring it in, bale it, or bale it in the field and bring it in. So there's a lot of variables at play. But you know, I've been reading receipts for people using other folks' hay bales, and they're baling at a time, like they're baling 11 to 20 tons. You know, they're baling between 10 and 20 tons of hay. You see this pretty commonly, and that's a huge amount. You have to think about that scale. So I'm just going to show you these here. This is, I think this is Jacob Grosvenor of New York, 1837, patents this design for a hay press, and you see what's going on here is you've got this arm that articulates, and it's going to push down a compression piston inside this chamber here to make that bale. Likewise, we've got this. This is a press from Maine, and C.W. Hawkes also that year patents a cotton press, separate from his hay press. 1 year, 2 different types of press from the same guy in the state of Maine, probably thinking about supplying hay to Boston, you know, rather than the city of New York, which is what Grosvenor's worried about. And you can see materially, these designs are very, very different. He's got a compression chamber that isn't articulated by levers, but by cams and cogwheels instead. So you've got like a transmission of gears where you can hook this thing up to a strap or a band on a capstan and use a gear reduction to apply that force instead of a lever and a block and tackle. So region by region, state by state, these designs vary considerably. And I can get into that more after the fact, but I want to keep chugging along here. Yeah, so this is just 2 more. This is a design from California in 1865, which uses it actually has a differential. It's probably the first time somebody ever has a differential fail is on a hay press rather than on a car. So you've got this differential system that's hooked up to a gear reduction that creates compression in the chamber on top of this small wheeled vehicle that you're pulling through a field. So you're literally bringing the baler out of the barn for the first time, putting it in the field, and using that motive force of your draft animals to do the pressing for you. And this is Samuel Hewitt of Indiana, creates this press, which I just love. It's a Greek Revival hay press. He's got columns on this thing. This is so cool. And this entire system, he's got this rotating mechanism down on the bottom here. It's very similar to that press we saw from Alabama from the 1860s, but he's decided, okay, I'm going to have draft animals on a capstan, and we'll just hook that capstan up to this wheel on the bottom of the device so that your work platform and your compression chamber, all of that is separate from the mechanism down here underneath where that force is being applied. And he's got a whole separate apparatus with weights on the top, so you're dropping a weighted pressure plate down at the same time you're pushing upwards. Now, I'm showing you all of these. The question that remains with every single design I show you is, How are these marketed? Did they ever market them? You can patent whatever you want. You might never get it to the store, So a lot of these probably represent somebody's decision to either look at a design that was in existence at that time and move somewhat beyond it, or they had traveled somewhere and they bring a design back and they innovate on that. All told, these guys, all these farmers, they're experimenting out in the field. They're creating these presses, so you end up with these designs that probably never end up getting patented that represent a hybrid of the things that they saw that worked best in other people's barns. So, the hay press in Greene County. As Greene County historian, I'm obligated to talk about Greene County. I'm sorry, Albany County. But the reason I talk about Greene and Columbia, and I will talk about Albany in a minute, is because for whatever reason, these are kind of an epicenter of hay press innovation and design. We've got the Diedrich family, we've got the Bullock family, we've got the Lampmans. It's a busy, busy place. We've got William C. Van Hoosen, who at the end of his life decided that the most important thing he could possibly say about his life and his work was that on his gravestone in the Catskill Village Cemetery, he was the original inventor of the lever hay press. And that's unbelievable. How many graveyards have you walked through where somebody put on a gravestone, I invented the tractor, And that's what this guy's saying, This is, and it's kind of got the energy of a guy who maybe was like, in the 80s working with Bill Gates and was the guy who really invented the computer but actually is forgotten about now. That's kind of the vibe I get from William Van Hoosen, who is a guy who's innovating but is completely forgotten about even in his own lifetime, and he's probably shaking his fist saying, that was me, that was me. So, first mentions of hay pressing, local innovations, types of presses in use, and major producers of presses. I'm going to just cover these right in a row here, so let's fire along. Again, no PowerPoint presentation is complete without dramatic quotes. So we've covered charts and dramatic quotes now. Every considerable farmer has his hay press and sends all his surplus hay on to market. And that's a letter from Abner Austin, who owned a paper mill in Catskill on Catskill Creek. He's writing to an associate of his in 1835 talking about this. And here's just a really mundane letter. And that's like you or I saying, yeah, everybody gets in cars and drives them. And years from now, historians are going to say, oh, that's very interesting. They were driving cars in Bethlehem at that time. But the long and short of this is that, we've got this benchmark here where here's a guy who's saying this is something that is commonplace here now in the 1830s. This is normal. This is the thing that people do. And that's really cool. We've got a map here separately just to establish the idea of when these hay presses appear, in this part of the valley and become something that's being used regularly. This is, and I don't know how I found this. This is from a collection of like 400 maps that came from Greene County Real Property Tax Services and Mapping. And I was just scrolling through them. This is a map of a water course that used to run underneath Main Street in Catskill past Water Street. And down in the corner here is Hawley's Hay Press. Just a fluke that I spotted it, but there it is. And this is right, who's been to Catskill? I'm sorry. I live there now. Catskill, this is right next to the Uncle Sam Bridge, where you go over Catskill Creek by the old mill building. So that's where Hawley's Hay Press was in this map that's drawn by John Van Vechten, probably around 1820. And this is really interesting too, because this is in the middle of the village of Catskill. Hawley's Hay Press is down by the creek. What's going on here? These are farmers who are growing their hay elsewhere, seasoning it elsewhere, bringing it down by wagon in big piles to Catskill Creek, and they're probably getting charged by George Hawley to bale their hay there and load it immediately onto a boat that's at the dock. That's really, really cool. This is the market economy evolving at that time. This is a departure from the Van Bergens and their barns and their hay barracks out in Leeds. Here's a guy who isn't in the business of agriculture. He's in the business of charging farmers to get their agricultural work done and to market. Yeah, so that's really interesting. we'll jump right ahead here. We've got an advertisement from the Vandenberg family of Coxsackie for the sale of a farm of about 130 acres and a hay press. Anybody who's done research on Fulton postcards, old Fulton postcards? Yeah, you recognize the highlighting there from my text search that turned that up. That's from the Catskill Recorder in 1829. And you think, that's the Van Bergen saying, oh, the important thing to include in this newspaper advertisement we're paying for by the letter is mention of the hay press we've got. And here, this is an estate of Jeremiah Van Loon, who was dead at this point, hence the estate document. And his estate is taking the hay that was grown on his farm and using Nathan Clark's hay press to press that hay and get it to market, either to draw revenue for the estate or to pay down debts. And this is really interesting because Nathan Clark, not a farmer. He's a potter. He runs a pottery in town. He actually is in the stoneware business, and he's in the shipping business, and he's in the politics business. Important guy. And yet again here, all right, I couldn't find any earlier advertisements that kind of capture this, but really by the 1860s, we're at the peak of this, the beginning of the golden age of the horse in New York. So this is an advertisement for the barge Atlas of Coxsackie, and it summarizes their schedule. So this is something every farmer would have cut out and stuck on their refrigerator. No, but no, more or less, yeah, they would have stuck it on their ice block, and then it would have melted, and they would have stuck it back on again, and would have melted, stuck it back. But down at the bottom here, so special attention given to hay. Captain Van Schack will constantly be in New York attending to sales. His long experience and well-known success in this capacity will ensure the farmer the highest market prices. Because everybody who's trying to buy hay in New York is looking at those bales and saying, that's an old bale. I'm not paying that for that bale. You go to Van Schack and he's like, these are fresh. You're paying good money for these bales. Use the barge Atlas when you have to ship your stuff down to New York. And these barges, these are barges that are owned by businessmen in the city of New York and the city of Albany. Essentially, you'd have a barge, you'd have it tied up to a dock, and then you'd contract with a steamboat company to tow it down the river or back up the river. So you're filling these things, you're filling them with agricultural produce, and then you're using Robert Fulton's crazy idea to move them real fast. So that, again, that's from the Democratic Journal of 1861. So, now, the hay press in Greene County. I cheated here a little bit. I want you to ignore this one, but don't, because this is a patent from New Jersey, but the guy is born in Greenville, New York. So he's local. I'm counting him. But we've got William C. Van Hoosen, the inventor of the lever hay press, buried in Catskill. Here is his hay press that he patents in the 1840s. This is 1841. Nicholas Lampman innovates on that design, probably much to the dismay of William Van Hoosen, and in 1846 patents a very similar hay press that uses a gear reduction instead of block and tackle to apply that force. Likewise, right across the river in Kinderhook, Levi Diedrich. And you're starting to see there's kind of a theme here. We've got a box, we've got two lever arms that get pulled in and upwards and press that hay on the second floor chamber. It's all kind of William Van Hoosen's design, but So Levi Diedrich in Kinderhook innovates on the design that William Van Hoosen comes up with and patents his own version of it. Cornelius Martret, this patent is, and this is another issue, it's the patent office. You have to go find a patent lawyer, you go to New York for that. So Martret is from New Baltimore, New York, and he patents a design that's actually very similar in principle to the one we have at the Greene County Historical Society in a number of ways. I'll get into that later. But likewise, this is 1858. He also patents a safety door because these hay presses are creating such immense pressures inside these chambers to create these bales that if you don't have the right door on there and it just blows off, it sends splinters everywhere. So a lot of newspaper articles from this period are talking about the injuries sustained by people working around these things. What's the worst that could happen if you build something out of wood and nails and then make it, apply pressure to it over a considerable amount of time? Yeah, lots of splinters flying everywhere. Yeah, and William Bullock's press, which actually I think is the best candidate for the origin of the design of the press that's at the Greene County Historical Society. He patents this in New Jersey. He's from Greenville, and he gets famous later on for patenting a bunch of designs for printing presses in Philadelphia. So take that as you will. But this press is very, very similar.
How different does one patent have to be from another one in order not to violate the patent?
You know, this is a question I have too, because really what it seems is happening is the innovations are in the specific applications of force. You see, really by the 1860s and 70s, everybody has decided on the way the compression chamber should be configured, but they're still kind of weaseling around each other's patents by saying, oh, well, I created a new patent armature that secures, you know, your pulling ropes and cables, and instead of using chain on this, I'm using, you know, wire rope, and instead of using hemp, I'm using chain and things like that. So they're all kind of getting around each other's with these subtle variations that mechanically are doing the same thing, but are doing it in ways that might make it easier for so-and-so or so-and-so. There's also patents on the capstans that you're hooking up your animals to apply that motive force and pull cable. So, let's get right into this here. The Vanderzee hay press. So this is a picture of a hay press installed in a barn, which is nothing to speak of. You see why I've been looking at patent images so far. This is kind of confusing and abstract. What we've got, jumping ahead here. Sorry about that. All right, that's my one gaffe for the evening. So we'll talk about the origins of the Vanderzee press, clues about its age, saving the press, and installation at GCHS. So this picture here shows the capstan, which down underneath the floor is hooked up to a large chain that's wrapped around the base of the capstan, and it runs down to these two piston arms, like think of them as piston rods that are hooked together by two iron tie rods and are hooked up to two separate cam arms on each that allow them to articulate up underneath the device. So as you turn the capstan, what's happening is you're pulling these two lever arms by their bases upwards and in. So the force is going that way towards the capstan, and they're pulling up and inwards to press a plate up towards the roof of the barn. And we put something else in the way on top so that the hay in the middle gets mushed. So it's a two-story device, and this is a lot of hay presses at that time. What happens is you install them, you build them into the barn. They are not mobile. You can't just take them out in the field and do whatever you want because they're tippy, first off. You kind of have to build them into the barn because the mechanisms themselves, they'll fall over if you're not careful, and that's something you read about accidents happening with. But so you end up with a work platform on the top near your hay loft where the hay is being loaded, and then you have a separate stage down below which probably has ready access to the outdoors where you're hooking up your draft animal, you know, your donkey or your ox or your horse, who's going to be just walking in circles all day around a greased track with that capstan in the middle that's going to be applying the motive force whenever you want. So this capstan has a clutch on it. That lever disengages the capstan from the donkey and stops the donkey from applying force as it's walking around in circles, and allows you to back the capstan down without having to back the animal and things like that. So there's all these cool little decisions that get made, but I'll show you kind of how it works. So this is the top of the Vanderzee press on this side. So this is the compression chamber, and when we built this into the barn, we didn't quite have the right dimensions. The Vanderzee press was built for the Vanderzee barn. It was built to fit into a barn. It's very probable that the Vanderzees actually custom designed the barn around that hay press. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But the long and short of it is, so we've got this compression chamber on the top. These arms that move across the top here, these are to articulate the safety doors. So it's kind of like actually, and thank you again for the model, like this. So these levers articulate the door to open and close it. So maybe we'll have everybody come up and play with this in a minute too. And so that compression chamber on the top, it's got doors on the sides, it's got a sliding piece on the top where you pull it away to load hay in. And the compression chamber itself, when the follower, that piston head, is dropped all the way back down, when the capstan is backed out and the rods and the levers are all the way down in their extended position, that chamber makes a great home for raccoons, but it also is probably 8 feet tall. So you can just load hay into that, load that hay in, cap it off, and then somebody, slaps the back of the donkey and starts walking, and that piston pushes upwards, squishes the hay, and then, I don't know if you can all see this clearly, but the way these doors are designed and the way these tops are designed, they have slats here. And those slats aren't so you can see if there's hay in there, it's so you can fit wire around the bale. Because once you've applied that pressure, you gotta maintain it somehow. You can't just back it off, otherwise you have no hay bale. So you've got a way to access and thread your wire around to seal it, tie it up, and then you have a bale that's ready to be pulled out, heaved off onto a wagon and brought somewhere. Are we all pretty clear on that? I'm sorry, this is abstract stuff. These are all farmers who took the simple machine and made it not simple. So I show I show the Bullock hay press next to this because you'll see the configuration is the same. We've got this piece down here that's pulled that way to force that follower upwards, and the compression chamber is up on the top here. So that's the idea we're going with. Now, when is this press made? The earliest graffiti, and thank heavens for graffiti, any bored farmhand who's done hay has had time to scratch a little bit of graffiti on the barn. So this press is covered with graffiti. The earliest graffiti I could find is from the 1870s. And that could be an indicator of a lot of things because the press, like all mechanical devices, wears out, parts were replaced, parts were changed and swapped, paint fades, things like that. So we're assuming 1870 is, this earliest date. I'm arguing that it's much earlier than that. I think this is a used press that the Vanderzees purchased because we see a purchase by the Vanderzees of this press, and I think it's for like $150. In 1872, they buy this thing and they install it in a new barn that they use to replace a New World Dutch barn. So this is in the 1870s. The Vanderzee family is changing their farm from an old Hudson Valley Dutch farm into this specialized place for the production of very specific agricultural products. They've gotten rid of the do-all barn and they've made a hay barn and they've put a stationary press inside that barn. And it seems like based on the prices of other used presses around that time, they bought a used one from somewhere. Because they could have gone at that time to P.K. Diedrich and Sons of Albany and purchased a really nice new totally metal mobile press, but nobody had that kind of money. So I'm assuming this press, based on the designs that we're seeing, so this is actually the really nice color version of the original patent application for Bullock's press from New Jersey. This design and this style of that two-story hay press, that's kind of fallen out of vogue by the late 1860s, early 1870s when the Vanderzees are putting this in their barn. People are getting mobile balers at that point. People are making balers that have compression chambers that are a little more accessible. The Diedrichs are making them where the compression chamber's down lower on the device and easier to access. You can drag them out into a field if you want because of their stability. A lot of changes happening. So that's all to say that I'm assuming this press is actually older. It's probably built on designs that are evocative of the Bullocks and the Martrap press that's designed in the 1850s and innovated on. And who builds it, we don't know. These are designs where essentially somebody with the know-how could go look at somebody else's press, and it's a matter of carpentry and a matter of going down to your local foundry at that time and having them do job casting of the metal fittings that you'd need. And you'd be able to talk to the foreman at that foundry to have those cast. So Catskill has a foundry at that time that did job work like that. Coxsackie has a foundry that does job work at that time like that could have made all the metal fittings that go to these devices. And that's weird to think about too. We don't think of that kind of innovation and that kind of manufacturing being accessible to the everyday farmer at that time, but these job castings that they would do are something that's relatively cheap and affordable if you have the material. If you can melt down the stuff, or if you can pay for the scrap, you can get that done. And then all of this goes out the window, everything I'm talking about. This is Peter K. Diedrich, who is like the god hero of the stationary and then the mobile hay press. This is the guy who takes the hay press and says, let's make this the mechanical baler that we understand in the 20th century. Peter Diedrich is a nephew of Levi Diedrich, who's that innovator from Kinderhook, who's designing presses in the 1840s that are really making William Van Hoosen mad. Young Peter Diedrich, over the course of his life, ends up patenting like 300 different patents for agricultural implements, primarily presses and balers and capstans and different types of compression chambers to make bales. And he makes oodles of money. He gets a mausoleum in Albany Rural Cemetery, and he runs P.K. Diedrich and Sons, which is a huge foundry and production center that in the 1890s was the one that supplies the hay presses to the British Army during the Boer Wars. This is the guy who makes it big. He goes from this being a regional innovation. The Diedrich press is the press that is used internationally. So this is a whole other order of scale. So I'll just show you here. This is a type of Diedrich press that is common in the 1860s. So this is like a Civil War era Diedrich press, and this is from a book called Farm Implements and Farm Machinery and Why They're So Great. That's published in 1869. That summarizes all types, and a farmer could go and buy this or go to this and essentially find out about all the latest innovations and what the greatest things in the world of agriculture are at that time. And the Diedrich press is illustrated as the best kind of agricultural press for baling hay that's available to farmers anywhere in the U.S. at that time, which is quite a statement. And this is before Peter Diedrich has really turned his small manufactory into this epicenter of industry. Look at the size of these shops. Look at the types of products they're making. They're making traction engines for people. They're making mobile balers on wheels that have a compression chamber that's oriented horizontally that'll spit a bale out the back without anybody having to be up on a platform around the compression chamber. He's innovating, innovating, innovating.
That was in Albany.
Yes, yeah. So now I get to talk about Albany County. That's Albany County right there. This is we've talked about all these little regional shops, and now we've gone, and here's Peter Diedrich, who has just cornered the market, and he's just made the best thing ever. He's got catalogs. He's got color illustrations of every type of press. You can get them in different paint jobs. It's really, really unbelievable. So by the end of the 19th century, most of the presses that you're seeing are Diedrich presses that are being used on farms in the valley. And all the patents I found are all Diedrich patents after 1880. So this is just to juxtapose here. So this is an image probably from around 1890 down in Rhinebeck of a portable baler out in a field. So this is, again, this is a departure from the Vanderzee press, which has to be stationary, built in the barn. Here's a smaller press that's making smaller bales in Rhinebeck out in the field. And you see, there's inconveniences here. You have to have a stone boat to haul loads of stone to weigh down the capstan. You have to have your draft animals. You still have to bring all the hay more or less to the thing in the field. And then, of course, all of this is supplanted by the mobile mechanical balers of the 20th century. So this is what does these in. This is why by the 1930s, when I'm reading estate inventories, they describe hay presses as being places where a lot of things are stored on top of them in barns. So you'll read these estate inventories and they'll say 20 feet of boards and a stack of chain, and down inside the hay press was more chain, and because they're just heaping stuff on top of these old things in the corners of these barns, or they're taking them out of the barns and they're burning them for firewood. So, probably during a scrap drive in World War II, a lot of hay presses, their metal fittings got turned into tanks and the wood got turned into firewood. So it's kind of a fluke that we have these survivors now that persist, that we're able to look back at and consider, as something that's representative of this era of innovation. So, with that, I'll take questions in a second, but I want to show you this too, because this is a really cool model. This is a salesman's model, because you can't just drag one of these to somebody's house and put it in their living room. And so thank you again. This is from, actually, I believe it was in a general store in Medusa. So this was something that people could have looked at and said, oh, I want one of those. And the guy says, well, you know, it's a lot bigger than that, really, right? And the answer is yes. But this press, this is kind of like a Diedrich press, but we did a quick survey of the patents that I had found from New York and couldn't find one that exactly matches this. So it is what it is. But the long and short here is that you've got this wheel, which, as you articulate it, let's start from the beginning. I am a farmer. I am going to load this with hay. I'm going to probably be working on a platform, or I'm on the second floor of my barn, and I'm stuffing hay into this box. And this box goes all the way down. You know, you can stick your hand in there. There's a lot of space.
You want the lights on up here?
Should we put the lights on? Sure. Yeah, here, he's got them in the back. Behold, now I'm doing what my Vanna White impersonation. You can fit so much hay in this bad boy. So, yeah. So we've loaded it with hay now, and I'm going to slap the back of the donkey, and the donkey's going to start walking. And you know, probably this has rope coiled around it that's now being drawn onto a capstan that's rotating, and it's going to rotate, rotate, rotate. And now what's happening is these levers are pulling on two connector rods here that are pulling a compression chamber upwards inside this thing. So we're going up and up and up and up and up and up and up. And we're going to hit probably a point right about here where we've got, oh, what's this? We've actually got a box of some goodies here to make it drop back down, but normally you'd have the weight of the hay in there. So you know, we'll say this rotates all the way up into its totally vertical position here, drop it down, and then inside here you'll see that the bottom platform has come all the way up at this point, and you still have access to get around, put your baling wire in on the top and the bottom. This is something I have a question about. I don't know how they would have secured this at that time, but this is a model I've just seen today. Normally what you'd probably have is some type of lever or hook that would latch down and keep that in place until you're ready to release it. And that's how a hay press works. So let me drop this back down with our handy weight. Otherwise it doesn't drop back down, I'd imagine. And at this point, you know, so this is, we've disconnected the clutch from the donkey, you know, walking around the capstan. And this is the dangerous part. This is the part where people get their ankles caught and broken, is because these things could just drop right down if you're not careful. So one of the things you see in a lot of patents is they'll have this weird small counterweight device that would add a little weight. When the arms are redeployed out, it slows them down slightly. It's like a governor on the mechanism to keep it from just slamming back down. So, yeah, and we've got a hay bale, and then you rinse and repeat. So, questions now.
Were any of the early pressers ever water powered?
You know, not that I've seen. Not that I've seen.
Because you've got a spinning wheel.
I know. And I don't know if that's because of the scarcity of mill seats and the amount of hay that needs to be pressed. I know that's an issue in Albany County because of the patroonship, and the patroon has rights to all of the mill seats in the county, west of Albany. But in Greene County, for example, you know, there's a question of when you're using water power, you also need a lot of gear reductions because the motive force of the water that you can harness might not necessarily be of a force equal to the mechanism you need to force that hay into a compact bale. It'd be great for sawing wood or for grinding things, or fulling things, but it might not be something that could apply considerable force and pressure. And then once it's pressed, that wheel's still turning. What are you doing then? So you got to have a clutch to disengage it real quick. And then what happens? Does it have catches that it's positioned it there? The complexity increases with the amount of available power. So. All right, other questions? We got way in the back there.
Yeah, I was wondering, when they press the hay there, are they pretty much all the same size? Like you get 50-pound bales or 100-pound, I don't know how big they were.
No, you know, so each press is probably going to make a bale of a slightly different size.
Someone to buy it,
Yeah, and what you've got are hay scales where out, either at the market or when you're loading your hay, you've got a hay scale that's going to weigh that bale for you, because you're selling these by weight, not necessarily by bale. Or at least that's my understanding.
What did they invent wire? That was
I don't know, because they're using steel banding on cotton, I think in the 1830s.
really.
Yeah. Mass-produced wire is another story. I don't know. But I also don't know what they're using to bind these things prior to that. If they're using a heavier rope of some sort, because, again, the force is considerable. But, by the middle of the 19th century, you can buy a custom-designed baling wire that will fit a bale like that. And what it has on it is an end that's twisted into an eye that's ready to go. And you'd essentially feed it through, snake it back over, and then feed the loose end through that eye, secure it, twist it, and then you're ready to go. And that's by the 1860s that you can get stuff like that. It's also a matter of what the farmer can afford to buy to sell his hay with. Because every single one of these things that we talked about is expense layered on expense. But that's a good question. Any other questions? Yeah.
What did the graffiti say on the Vandersea?
One of them is like G.H. Niffen or something like that, 1870. It's just the names of kids, who are working on the farm. And they aren't family members either. They're guys who are working seasonally on these farms, so far as we can tell. I've never done a comparison of the Vandersea family's day books to see who's where and when writing these things, but it would be neat to know. It could also have just been a bunch of people at a barn dance who decided, hey, let's leave our names. There's a family farm, Irv Smith, who's since passed away, at a family farm up in New Baltimore that had a barn on it that was the original house on the property from the 1790s, and it's converted to an auxiliary barn for wagons sometime in the 1860s or 70s. And in the 19-teens, 20s, and 30s, it's used as a dance hall. So all the rafters are covered with the graffiti of people, and it say so-and-so and so-and-so in a heart, New York City, 1921. And I mean, every square inch of the rafters in the main floor of this thing is covered with that graffiti. It's so great. And he had a model of a hay press of a different configuration that was also a salesman's model. So, all right, another question.
Do you know the physical dimensions of the Vandersea press?
It's 60.
The bale that it made?
The bale it made, I haven't measured the pressure chamber, actually. I know the press itself is 6,300 pounds. The bale, by Ted Hilscher's reckoning, who's the guy who saved the press with Art Bias from the Vandersea farm, he says it was a 200-pound bale. But what you end up with the compression chamber, if I'm thinking of this right, you've got about a 4-foot by 2.5-foot by like 2.5-foot box at the end of the compression process. But I've only ever seen it run empty. We've never run it loaded. So I don't know actually if the press is capable of pressing the hay down to that point. There's actually a repair on the Vandersea press on the top where it failed catastrophically at some point, and 4 new pieces of wood had to be put in and faked into the existing vertical beams to brace the top of the compression chamber, because they must have just blown off one day. So it's a great question, though. So my answer is no, I don't know. Yeah, they're big. They're big. It's a lot bigger than a modern bale. It's not something one person could, if you're real tough and you're real brave and honest and you only do it once, you might be able to manhandle one of these once, but you're not doing it for a day. We had another hand up over here, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so 3 farmers take their hay down to Catskill to be baled and stuck on a steamboat to go to New York City. How do they label their bales and guarantee that they get paid for the right amount in the city and get the money back to Catskill?
I was wondering the same thing, and I don't know if they would load these divided, or if they'd tag them with like a colored piece of fabric or something like that. I haven't found anything that gives me a clue for that. You have to remember, though, like the guys who are doing the loading and unloading are guys you see every summer, all summer long when you're loading this stuff, and you're dealing with a merchant you trust in the city of New York to be your representative. You're dealing with a guy like Captain Van Schack. So, there's an accounting probably when the stuff goes on the barge and when it's loaded by weight. I don't know how they're flagging them though. That's a great question.
Same as a grist mill.
Same as a grist mill?
Yeah.
What does a grist mill do?
Huh? Well, you bring your grain in,
Yeah.
it's ground.
Yeah.
And they usually do it by the seller.
Okay.
And they'll do the whole batch, and they'll mark that for that provider.
Yeah, that's another question too, is the farmer selling his hay at the boat when it's loaded, or is he getting the money after it's sold in New York, is another question I have, because a lot of these advertisements would seem to indicate the money is in hand after the sale in New York. And I think that's also something where, any shipper is incurring the risk with shipping hay. You put all that hay on a boat, and who's to say that steamboat doesn't burn? Who's to say that barge doesn't sink? So, I don't know where the calculation is occurring. This is good. When I finally write my book on this, these are all the questions I still have to answer. This is it.
Oh, we have taxes stuff?
What?
It's in New York taxes stuff?
Not that I'm aware of at that time, not that I could find, because that's something that any agricultural journal, they would issue schedules of these things and what going rates are, and that would have caused a whole kind of stir. That would have been in the Cultivator every month. So that's actually a great resource for this stuff, the Cultivator. It's published in Albany. It is a really important national agricultural magazine that's published here. And it's got correspondents across the United States who are writing in all through the mid-19th century. And there's Southern writers in their writing saying, hey, you guys up in New York really know how to bale hay, and we've just never really had a knack for it. What are the designs you guys are using now? And the next month's issue would have replies. It's so cool. We had a couple other hands peeking up in here, yeah.
Was the box always long way up, or was it
That is one of the really, really important variations. And what you'll see over time, let's see here, this is just New York. So let's start, this is organized chronologically. So here's P.K. Diedrich, and you see a lot of these are vertical orientations. That one is a horizontal orientation. That's a horizontal, you've got, these are all horizontal orientations. That's a vertical orientation. That's a vertical orientation with its own custom designed capstan that goes along with it, which is really cool. And this is just New York for that period, like 1840 to 1880. All the other states are here that I could find. So like, let's see, Texas has some cool ones. Where's T in the alphabet? Here, yeah. So you can see, like here in 1869, here's a portable, horizontally oriented baler that is being designed in Texas. Whether it's marketed or not, again, is another question. Here's another innovation on that design. This is a patent capstan to apply force to those balers. Because the question is, it's a horizontal portable baler. Is it using its own wheels to apply the force, or do you have to set it up with a weighted capstan separate from it and pull a rope that way? But yeah, so that's the variations. The early presses that we're talking about, the stuff through the 1840s, 50s, right to the eve of the Civil War, most of them are vertical designs, and they're being built into the barns as stationary tools. Your barn is where you're seasoning your hay and you're baling your hay and you're using your hay, so just put that in the barn too, and you've already got the hay in there, put your baler in there.
These are pretty big farms then, because usually the farms only feed their own animals.
Yeah, and that's like we saw that advertisement for a 130-acre farm in Coxsackie, but you have to remember, like Hawley's hay press. So if you're a small-scale farmer who does have excess hay, you could load up one wagon load and bring it down and press 10 bales and send them to New York. So, this type of thing is accessible to pretty much every farmer if they have a use for it. You might have to use a neighbor's, or you might invest in your own. Or you might be the smallest farm in the neighborhood, but your uncle dies and you got some money and you invest in the first hay press in the area, and then everybody brings their hay to you. There's all sorts of opportunities. So, Yeah.
One thing farmers had to learn early on with loose hay, they fill it right to the rafters.
Yeah.
When you went to bales, they didn't do that. They collapsed them on.
Yeah, so that's like, I'm thinking of like the specialization of hay production in the Hudson Valley. Who here has seen the 13-sided barn at the Bronk House? It's a round barn. And unfortunately, in the 60s, we took the wing off the barn that actually helped to make sense of it. That is a hay barn. That is an early innovation on a custom-designed hay barn where you have this big silo-like structure where you're stacking your hay up to the ceiling, and then you've got a wing, a 2-story wing that has access on the lower levels for wagons and has working floors on the top there to move that hay.
So it's like the shaker barns.
In a sense, but before, right in the middle of the shakers.
The shaker barns, they would store the hay in the top and then drop it down for the livestock.
Yeah, but you're not feeding the livestock in the 13-sided barn. You're just storing it there. Yeah, that's spot on though. Yeah. All right. I don't want to call an end to the questions, but these have all been amazing. I think we're going to wrap for the night here. It's 8:15. Everybody's starting to nod off, including me. But I just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Thank you for your time. This was a lot of fun.